Welcome to the Next Level Podcast, powered by San Manuel, a series connecting you with the best minds in casino, hospitality, tribal government, and beyond. Enjoy the show.
Lauren, Seiler, how are you doing today?
I am well, Kyle. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
No, absolutely. The pleasure is all on this side. When we were chatting a little bit before we started the recording, you were recommended by a past guest. Looking at your background, you're the perfect guest to have because, over your career, you really have an interesting perspective on all things gaming, the gaming industry, and then where we're going. Currently your title is the founder and principal consultant at Global Gaming Advisors. Looking at your LinkedIn, there's been several stops you've had along the way, but I always find it's better to start with kind of your story in your own words. So if you wouldn't mind for our audience today, give us the 2 to 3 minute origin story, like where you grew up, what your early interests were, and kind of the path to what you do today.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Yeah, I know it's definitely not a linear path. If you looked at that LinkedIn, it's a little bit confusing sometimes when you look at a few of those stops and kind of how I got to where I'm going or where I'm still going. So I guess kind of the quick and dirty of it is I grew up in a little suburb just north of New York City. Had an awesome family, lots of love, not a ton of money. So, I think very early on, there was a pretty strong work ethic that was instilled in myself and my sister. And, we were always kind of really focused on the big three things in my household. And those three things were, it was academics first, always, grades first. And then it was athletics and community service. So that was kind of the means that we leaned on towards, solidifying the future, creating that foundation for the future, getting into a great school, and ultimately what needed to be a little bit of scholarship money in the family to make it all work. So I ended up gravitating towards field hockey and firefighting. So the field hockey kind of helped me pay for college from an athletic scholarship perspective. And then the firefighting was really driven by my passion for helping people. And that's kind of been something that's been ingrained in me from a very young age, not ingrained, but just kind of part of who I am. So, as a firefighter, it made me think I wanted to be an emergency room trauma doctor. So I went off and decided I was going to be pre-med, went to college, thought that was my path. And as you can see in my LinkedIn, life doesn't always go according to the exact plans that we make for it, and had other plans for me. So I switched gears after my freshman year and I became an economics major. So I'd play hockey by day, I'd study by day, and then at night to make a couple of extra bucks, I was a bartender, like, a lot of people do. I was serving and bartending. And then I played a little bit of blackjack and got pretty good at it to help pay some of my other expenses. So, when I got out of school, I ended up on Wall Street. Somebody asked me, what do you want to do? I said, I want to make money. Okay, so we're going to go to Wall Street. Do you want to be in sales and trading? I said, great. I really wasn't sure what any of that meant at the time, but as I worked my way through Wall Street, what I realized is I could bring myself back to those early interests. And I actually ended up specializing in the casino and gaming industry before I transitioned from Wall Street over to the corporate side of casino gaming. So it's not linear, but it got me to where I am today. So we'll take it.
So let's talk a little, well, actually, before we talk about that pivot into casino gaming, I want to go back because so many interesting notes there: field hockey, firefighting, Wall Street, blackjack. But even going back before that, you kind of the three pillars of academics, athletics, and community service.
Yeah.
How foundational was that for you now looking back as far as the person you are today, those three pillars and kind of the way you grew up?
I think extremely, right? So there are so many things to be learned from those three pillars, right? So academics first, right? You have to be successful in school, right? And look, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of people out there that have had wonderful lives, great careers, done incredible things that weren't necessarily students, but in my house, that level of discipline and making sure that you were putting your studies first, kind of family and studies first was always very, very important. So, it didn't matter if you were the best on the field, if you were the best at anything else. If your grades were slacking, your grades are slacking. Get back inside and do your homework and make sure that, you bring those grades up. But the secondary part were those athletics, right? There's a level of learning to function on a team environment, a level of learning responsibility, a level of learning accountability. You're part of a greater good, all kind of, I think, embedded in that pillar of athletics. And that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a team sport, right? You can still be an individual athlete as part of a team and still learn a lot of those things. For example, if you're a golfer, a swimmer, or anything of the like. So, I think that they really, you learn skills in those environments that sets you up well for the future. And I think the third piece, right, the community service part of things is, it was always important in my family that no matter what your status, stature, ability, you always were giving something back, right? Because the world gave you a lot. So you always just give a little bit back to the world where you can. And for me, that was firefighting. So it's kind of interesting. You go from a woman in business, you go from firefighting, which is very much a male dominated field, to Wall Street, which is also a pretty male dominated field, and then into the gaming industry. So I don't know. I've always just kind of functioned well in that environment. And within that framework, you learn even more things that set you up for the future, right? You learn the value of partnership and teamwork and loyalty, making sure you can trust your other teammates, your fellow firefighters. If something goes wrong, if you can't trust them, if you fail, your safety's on the line, their safety's on the line. And even the people that you're kind of running in to try and help, their safety's on the line. So all of these things, I think in those three pillars that you're starting with end up ultimately leading to the experiences that format the adult, I guess, that you become, if that's the way to say it.
Yeah. And, when you talk about firefighting, field hockey, Wall Street, and you said, male dominated kind of areas, any words of advice? Because I'm sure there's people out there listening right now who are navigating that situation, 2024 and an environment beyond. Just any words of advice of those who are trying to succeed. And I think in general, just from a macro perspective, our industry is getting better, but I'm sure there's still a long way to go. But like, just any words of advice for people, because, it sounds like, if I'm hearing your story right, maybe it was helpful for you to kind of get that foundation early with sports and, early in your career. But just any words of advice, take this question we want, but any nuggets for people out there who are in that kind of situation.
Yeah, I think that it's very important. One of the things, at least on the Wall Street end of things, and look, even on the firefighting end of things, it was very important. Very much a supporter of women in all business and being able to do everything. Obviously, I've taken some interesting paths myself, but you've got to be able to hold your own. You've got to be confident and good at what you do. You've got to be able to speak up. You've got to be able to walk into a room and command it, and be confident in your own skills, be confident in your own education, be confident in your own training, and not be afraid to put that forward. Because I think a lot of times, there is a level of intimidation, whether it be in the boardroom or, in on a team, if it's, or in a fire department, whatever it might be. You've got to be able to and be willing to step up and hold your own.
And is there anything, any advice you'd give to leaders right now to maybe make it more? Because I'm trying to put my head in that scenario, right? Maybe there's an emerging leader, and might be afraid to speak up, whether woman, male, or whatever it may be. But like,
yeah,
any words of advice to maybe someone who's leading a room to get the best out of their team so that people want to speak up?
I think driving engagement is always a tricky thing, right? How do you get people when they're not necessarily comfortable in their own skin or in their environment to, I don't want to say loosen up a little bit, right? But to find their own voice, to find their own confidence. And, if you're sitting in the seat, I would say the first thing to do is to educate yourself, right? Everybody's going to be a little bit more confident in their voice and confident in their skill set and their abilities if they feel that they have educated themselves to the best of their abilities with the resources that they have. So I think that's a good starting point when you're on the other side of the table and you're trying to engage people. I think sometimes there's a question of, there, like we said earlier, there are good leaders, there are bad leaders. I find that some of the best leaders out there they don't have that ego. They don't have that presence of intimidation. Bring yourself down a few notches, put yourself in their seat, and really try and make it like we're doing here, conversational. Try and make things flow a little bit more easily. Make people want to open up to you and speak to you, and want, as a good leader, you want to give them that voice, right? So maybe even sometimes you got to back yourself down a little bit to let them feel comfortable coming forward.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's great advice. And Lauren, I want to go back to your story of Wall Street and then your transition into the gaming industry. Talk to me a little bit about that career path, kind of when you made that decision, what that looked like, and then ultimately kind of how you've built a career within gaming.
Yeah, sure. So while I was on Wall Street, I ended up actually specializing, like I said, in the casino and gaming industry. So it wasn't entirely foreign to me. You're just doing it on the other side of the business. So you're focused on the financials, on the operations. Part of what I was doing to try and assess and ascertain the financial stability of a company was evaluating their balance sheets, evaluating their financials, but also walking casino floors, immersing yourself in the day-to-day. You're walking a floor, you're looking, there are lights, there are sounds, you're looking at table minimums, you're looking at traffic, you're looking at what restaurants are being used. Is the club full? What are the amenities that people seem to be gravitating to? How can that translate into financial performance? So it wasn't an entirely foreign jump to go from the Wall Street side to the corporate side. And still to this day, there are a lot of aspects, including the one in which I crossed over, where the two work very closely together. So when you're talking about the sell side of Wall Street, you're talking about the research analysts that are out there building models and evaluating the companies and essentially making the recommendations to portfolio managers on what casino companies to buy and sell and why within their portfolios. So that was the side of the business that I was on. The other side, you have obviously the corporations, those companies that have publicly traded entities that are out there. So the management teams of the casinos do liaise and talk to and work closely with those analysts in a regulated environment. But one of the areas that has very close crossover would be the CFO function and the investor relations function. So the way I crossed over to the corporate side was in the investor relations function. So all of a sudden, whereas I was on one side of the table speaking to the IR team within a corporate, asking them questions and trying to understand their story better to tell that story to investors, all of a sudden I'm on the corporate side of the business in investor relations, telling the story to other sell side analysts who I'd worked with for almost 20 years. So it was kind of a seamless transition from that regard. The jobs are very, very similar. It's just what side of the table you're sitting on and what type of story you're telling, as opposed to you're telling your own company story as opposed to telling another company story to the positive or negative to investors.
That's well said. And I'm curious to know, let's just say when you first started in the industry, when you were doing evaluation, as you said, kind of immersed yourself, not only just the financials, but the casino operations itself.
Yeah.
What were some surprises or maybe some notions you had about casinos and gaming and, doing that due diligence on the financials end and the operations end? Looking back, or maybe at that time, were there anything that kind of caught you off guard or surprises or aha moments? I always feel like that's interesting for those who kind of from a different angle kind of look from a macro standpoint at the industry. And that's such an interesting insight for you is, looking at it from that angle. Just any surprises of those early days when you started doing that process?
You're talking on the financial side, learning the
Correct.
industry from the financial side.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, look, my exposure up until that point was as a player, right? Playing blackjack in college, and my exposure being a consumer of the services of a casino. And I think once you really start diving into the operations, into the financials, into how the businesses work and the nitty gritty, there's just so much that goes into, let's just use, for example, an integrated resort. So much goes into those operations. You don't think about the back of house. You don't think about the culinary aspects. You don't think about the cleaning aspects, some of the contracts that go into those things. You don't necessarily think about until you start studying up on it, how room rates and occupancy rates play into things, how it's not just the casino revenues that are driving the ultimate revenues for the company. Now that could be in some places, right? I'm just talking about in a bigger picture organization. The nuance of driving patrons between different parts of your property. So we used to call it, you used to look at time on table, right? Time on table would help you evaluate how the table game operations were doing and how the revenues might be doing there. But now it's almost like you're looking at time on resort, right? To get a bigger picture of how these companies make money and how they do what they do, how they draw people in and keep them in and keep them contributing to the revenue stream of the property. So, and then, there are the other things, just how many people are behind the scenes, not only from, like I mentioned, an operations perspective, but from a corporate perspective. How many different layers of corporate infrastructure there are, right down from, going from CEO to CFO to, your teams, to your finance teams, to your management teams, to your data teams. And I think that, sometimes people forget just how many people and lives that these casinos can touch on a day-to-day basis, not just the consumers.
Lauren, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question, but through both sides, whether you're evaluating a property or you're telling the story of a property, as you so elegantly said, but a rough number, how many casinos have you been involved with, whether it's on that side of the fence or the other?
I think ultimately the number, I have to put it at countless, not in that I was personally involved in evaluating countless casinos, but you're also looking at an industry on a whole, right? So it would get to the point where I'd be on a vacation and, for example, I went on vacation to Japan and I was walking around pre-construction sites that had been rumored to be future integrated resort sites in Osaka and in different parts of Japan. And I incorporated that into my vacation because I was so passionate about it. So when you talk about how many I've been involved with, I've walked countless casino floors all over the world. Every time I'm in a city, I make sure I seek out the casino. I just want to see it. I want to see what they look like in different locales, culturally, what the differences might be. So I don't think I could put a number on it. If you want to talk about what I've been involved with directly and financially, if you look back in time when I was on the Wall Street side, there were really, call it, three buckets of casino operations that were publicly traded at that point. It was the integrated resorts, the global destination operators. So that was, call it, your MGMs, your LVSs, your Wins that had Macanese gaming counterparts. Then you had the regionals. So at that point, now we're talking many years ago, I'm kind of dating myself, but the Penns, the Pinnacles, the Boyds, before they all kind of started to roll up and get together. This is before we started spinning out into gaming REITs and things of that nature. And then you had gaming technology. And back then, the gaming technology moniker or umbrella were the slot manufacturers. So your WMSs, your Bally's, not Bally the casino company, but the original Bally slot manufacturer, and the WMSs, those kinds of companies. So I've touched a lot of different areas and aspects of gaming in my day and probably walked, well over 100 casino floors at this point.
And that's the perfect setup for this question, which is with over 100 casinos that you've walked, obviously the analysis that you've done, whether it's distressed asset or whatever it may be. But I'm wondering correlations of those properties that ultimately drive, successful EBITDA or, net revenue from your perspective, the successful ones. Any correlations that you see? Take this question where you want, but whether it's the staff, the service, the gaming product, the amenities, but just any correlations out there when you evaluate a property on like, oh, this is a great property versus the ones who might be in trouble, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that it's a little bit of a challenging question to answer because no two casinos or properties are going to be entirely alike, and they kind of operate in different realms, right?
Right.
Like we said earlier, you have the global destination operators, you have the local, kind of, we'll call them more regional operators, you have the tribal operators, and they all have their own nuances that within their group might make them excel versus not. Some of that can be just down to locations. Some of that can be down to access to highways, access to population. There are a lot of things that, that can change that. And that doesn't mean a property that doesn't have access to those things can't be successful. They're successful in their own right with what they have to offer. But, I think that when you look at, the people that are really knocking it out of park, let's just keep it simple and look at the global destination operators, right? It's the guys that can pull global players from all ends of the earth, right? And we even saw how some of that created pressure during COVID when you couldn't get some of the international players in the door. So it's the folks with the global reach. It's the folks that have vertically integrated operations. So at this point, now that you're incorporating iGaming and sports betting from a digital perspective, it's the guys that can truly leverage their entire network of player, from the person sitting at home on their couch, maybe to one of their regional properties, then potentially maybe to one of their Vegas properties, then maybe to one of their global properties, right? To be able to capture every aspect of the lifestyle of that player, I think those folks tend to be a little bit more successful from driving overall corporate EBITDA. From a property level, I do think amenities count. And I think that, one of the things we kind of chatted about before we started here is, what does 2030 look like? And, it always seems so far away, but now it really is so close. One of those things that I think some of the smaller, more regional casinos can do better in driving those revenues and EBITDA are taking a page out of the integrated operator resort books, doing a little bit better job at optimizing the F&B, optimizing the entertainment experiences on their smaller properties. You can make some very small investments and some small tweaks and really kind of drive more excitement, even if you're not one of the biggest players in town. How do you get the bachelor and bachelorette parties in there? How do you get the group business in there? There are very small things that you can do. Maybe upgrade your restaurant a little bit, that I think will be one of the trends going forward for the smaller guys, almost emulating the bigger players to a degree. And they certainly have tried, but I think that's going to be a theme in how they can optimize their own businesses.
Yeah, I wrote so many good notes there. And one of the things I kind of circled was, even if you're a global property, you talked about global reach during the pandemic, but I feel like a lot of properties succeeded who built their database and had those loyal customers because they could reach them, right? They can have
Absolutely.
certain offers that could strategically drive business, but also create that loyalty, right? When
Yep.
it was a real challenge during that time, and I think you saw that whether it's at property level or global corporation level to that point.
Yep.
And it all comes back to that loyalty and those incentives that you talked about. And one thing I want to switching gears a little bit here. I'm curious to know, because with your background, you've touched so many different parts. Strong financial background. We talked about you growing up. Some of the discipline is a word that I wrote. You play blackjack, Wall Street. The multiple stops in your career. But if I had to say, what, Lauren, what is your superpower or your super skill that kind of makes all of it work, and what you do today work? What would that be?
I think I would have to probably say it's perseverance. I as a person tend to be absolutely relentless in achieving what I put my mind to, my dreams, whatever it might be. I don't give up. I don't quit. I don't quit. Failure isn't really an option. So if it's a task, if it's a goal, even if it's a person that I care about, no matter what the challenge, I don't give up on it. I just persevere through, because quitting and stopping and giving up just isn't an option to me. And I tend to just not finish projects, anything of the sort, until it's done.
And has that been from Jump Street for you, that sense of perseverance? Does that go back to that discipline and those foundations we talked about when you were younger, or is that something that you developed over your career?
No, I think that goes back to the early days. I think probably the only time I can pinpoint that it didn't necessarily play out the way I had perfectly envisioned it in my mind, and my type A personality was actually that college transition, when I went from the medical field over to the finance and economics field. And look, the reality is that part of that was circumstantial. And I think that's something that's very important when you're looking at elevating your own career, is the ability to adapt to change. And that was a time that I had to adapt to change, right? So you're playing hockey, you're working, you're trying to put yourself through school, and you're trying to be pre-med. Something gave, right? And what gave? Well, you get your first B in your first pre-med class and you're weeded out. That's it. Sorry, and it's kind of disturbing that can happen freshman, sophomore year so quickly, but you have to pivot. So I think that's the only time I wasn't able to fully persevere through something, because of the circumstances. Once that B happened and those couple of Bs happened, all of a sudden you realize you've got to change your route, or you're going to be left behind. So that's what I did. So I guess maybe that's just another form of perseverance, but it definitely started at a very young age.
And then Lauren, looking through your background here, it seems like you've made some key pivots throughout your career, and you have perseverance on one angle, and then you
Yep.
have kind of pivots on the other, and those are not binary, right? But I think it's an interesting question, which is, how do you evaluate, for those listening, which is, how do I get to the next level of my career, or when's it time to take a new job, or maybe it's time to explore outside of the company I'm with, or maybe I want to jump after that entrepreneurial thing that I've always thought about. Like, for you, how do you go about making sure you persevere, maybe some of the resistance that might come into a role, but at the same time also know when it's time for a change and maybe pursue something different? How do you kind of, any words of advice on that end?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you had said they don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive, but if you actually look at the path, once I made it to once I was on Wall Street, I focused on casinos and gaming, and the path actually hasn't been as choppy as it might seem. Every stop along the way was one step in the progression towards getting where I wanted to be. So the basis and foundation for what I'm doing now came from those Wall Street days, evaluating casino and gaming companies, knowing that was what I was passionate about, what I love to do, knowing from my early days of blackjack that I felt very much at home on a casino floor, and knowing that was what I wanted to focus my career on. To, I don't want to say rolling with the punches, but kind of rolling with where that career took me. So it was Wall Street, climbed my way up Wall Street, always focused on casinos and gaming, and then even further, going with a very specifically focused company only on casinos, gaming, right? So going from firms that might have looked at and covered all spaces, aerospace, papers, packaging, financials, to one that only focused on casinos and gaming. So narrowing the funnel a little bit. And then from there, again, starting a vertical with another Wall Street company focused solely on casinos and gaming, and focused on the evaluation portion of things. And then it was a transition into private equity. So from the sell side, I went to private equity with the expectation that I was going to open or start my own fund strictly focused on the casino and gaming space. It was just post PASPA in 2018. Saw the writing on the wall that we were going to see an explosion in the sports betting and iGaming spaces, and wanted to get ahead of it from a PE and VC perspective. So was going to kind of start my own little fund, and was working through the funding aspect of that, building my connections to vet companies, do my own due diligence to see what my portfolio would look like once it was funded. And then ultimately, in creating those relationships, it clicked to me that there was a whole this whole other world that I knew, but that I truly did want to be a part of. Instead of on the investment side, I wanted to be on the corporate side of it. So yes, that was a pivot. That was definitely a pivot, right? To go from Wall Street to the corporate side, but it was only kind of, let's call it a half a pivot, right? Because I still stayed to my roots of the investor portion of the casino and gaming industry. So, I do think that you need to be cognizant of what's happening around you. It was a time when the sell side was contracting from an industry perspective. What's next? You're getting older. It's a lot harder to put in the 20-hour days to do the, junior Wall Street and then climbing your way up Wall Street kind of life and schedule. How is it going to fit with your future? How is it going to fit with your family? How is it going to fit with your personal aspirations? How is it going to fit with your work-life balance? And all of those things were things that I took into consideration when I decided to pivot over to the corporate side of the business, right? Not necessarily under that constant Wall Street eye and pressure, but still having those aspects of what I grew up on and what I loved within my career.
Right now, founder, CEO, and principal consultant at Global Gaming Advisors. If I had to ask you, the main function of your role today is
Yeah.
blank. How would you
Okay.
finish that sentence?
Well, the main function, I'll call it the gaming industry, right? I know that's a little bit broad, but we can start with that. Look, it's a little consulting firm. It services at this point the corporate side of the business that I've since transitioned to from Wall Street, but I still leverage that background that I have. I've always been on either side of the business very passionate about driving growth for any organization that I'm a part of. So everything I try to do largely focuses on driving growth in one area or another. And so what I'm doing now is working to facilitate driving that growth for companies. So it can be through M&A, corporate and business development. It can be through new market access. It can even be through existing business optimization, as we talked about, kind of walking those floors, seeing what's working, what's not, putting together plans to try and improve that. Or it can also be driving growth from a financial perspective in helping organizations improve their investor relations function and their financial communications function. That down the line, as I experienced earlier in my career on the Wall Street side, helps improve management credibility. You improve management credibility, you improve your shareholder base, and then ultimately you can improve the company's stock price. So it all does kind of flow together when you take it in order.
I had this conversation with Hector, CEO of Aristocrat, Hector Fernandez, and he had such a background in financial literacy, and basically like how that was the foundation of everything that he did beyond that, right? Once he learned the operations side, he could speak the language of business, and how that was so successful for him. And I find that with a lot of leaders on this platform is they kind of master that piece of financial literacy accounting, but they can explain it in ways that really drive the business and operations forward, if that makes sense. So I'm just curious to know for you, and also people listening out there, just the role of financial and accounting literacy, like how foundational has that been for you and your success? And also what would you advise people on that as they think about, I might want to be a future CMO, CEO, whatever it may be, or maybe just the director of my department, whatever it may be. But I think on some level, you're going to have to kind of master that skill set to some degree. So just curious to know your words of advice there.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you nailed it. You're going to have to master that skill to some degree. For me personally, obviously, financial literacy has played a huge part in my career. If you spend 20 years on Wall Street, you have to have a certain degree of financial literacy. I've based a career on it, right? And I'm basing an entire consulting company on it at this point. So, it's definitely been a pillar for me. As far as what I would advise others, and is that it might not be a pillar for you, right? it might not be your thing. You might not be into it. You might not have any interest whatsoever. But educating yourself at least on the basics of your own business, your own company's finances, at least be able to be conversational in your own firm's finances, regardless of your role, regardless of your core competency, that can end up proving priceless for your own career, right? This is, we're talking about next level careers. You never know who you're going to be sitting next to at dinner, who you're going to be in a room with, who you might be pulled into a meeting with, who your next conversation might entail. And you never know when that little bit of financial literacy could be the nugget that you're pulling into a conversation that just elevates you in that person's eyes and really sparks your next journey, your next role, your next elevation.
And Lauren, when I say like energy, like you going forward, like what puts the wind in your sails to start the day? Like when you look at your career now going 20 years forward, where do you get the energy? What are you the most excited about?
I think part of anyone's career is you see your setbacks, you see the good times, the bad times, the hard times, the hockey sticks up, and then the falls from grace, right? So, I think at this point, what I've really learned to use as a fan to the fire are seeking out, acknowledging, and building upon small successes, right? It's not necessarily the big wins are great. Everybody loves big wins. Nobody out there doesn't. But it's really the small ones, how little bits of success and little bits of positivity and little bits of seeing your hard work play out can really create a snowball effect into larger successes and more positivity and bigger jumps down the line. So I think seeking and finding and acknowledging, embracing those small successes, I think are what really gives me the energy to keep pushing for the big ones.
Yeah. And I'm curious to know is there and I'll give you a second to think about it, but when you think about your own career, maybe it's not yourself, but someone you've worked with or a team that you're on, is there a small win that was foundational for you to give you that kind of momentum that you could think of, or maybe one that you saw recently that kind of just lit you up?
I think that the first small big win, or called big small win, small big win, or just win in general,
Yeah.
was really when I was able to make that crossover from Wall Street to corporate, right? Because when you're on the Wall Street side of things, it's something everybody wants to do. It's funny, sometimes you see the corporate guys want to be on Wall Street, the Wall Street guys want to be on corporate, and it's not the easiest transition to make. It takes a lot of networking and work and you know, it pretty much takes an entire building of a career to translate into something new. So I think when I finally was able to cross over from Wall Street to corporate, that was one of those wins that put the wind in my sails. I said, okay, you know what? You can do this. You did this, and you did it on your own. So let's keep running with it, and created that start of that snowball for me.
And Lauren, something we haven't touched on. It seems like you're a very driven person. You talked earlier about the resilience, discipline, but has there been anybody? I guess where I want to go with is the role of mentors.
Yeah.
How has that been foundational for you, as far as like finding people earlier in your career, maybe currently that you have mentors, just as people are thinking about, because you talked about you'll never know who you're next to at dinner, right? When you talked about that financial literacy, but the role of mentors, has that been pivotal for you?
Absolutely. I mean, if I think one of the most important things in anybody's career is to seek out and leverage good mentors, right? Anybody that will give you their time or a couple of minutes or whatever it is, take it, right? Take it, because they're willing to give you, it's a gift. It truly is a gift. And, going back to what you said about table, one of my, biggest mentors, my strongest mentors, that I'm most grateful for, I sat next to at dinner, right? So, you end up striking up a conversation, and it was obviously an industry conversation, but you cling on it as most you can. And I've learned more from that gentleman than I think probably I have from any textbook or any class I ever took or any job I ever had, just in the conversations that we have and in the guidance he's been able to give me and some of the kind connections that he's made for me. So absolutely. I think strong mentorship is probably like one of the number one things gifts that you can give yourself, seeking them out and leveraging them.
And I have to follow up on that, because one of the things we've heard, because we've done live panel discussions before, and when this subject comes up, one of the first question that comes is, well, how do I find a mentor? How do I seek out a mentor? Broad strokes, but like what advice would you give on people who to say, like, in my immediate area, I don't have a mentor. How do I go about seeking or finding one? Any words or advice there?
Well, look, I mean, at this point, you don't necessarily need to have one in your immediate area, right? So we've got this wonderful invention that's called the internet that we can now use from a networking perspective. We have LinkedIn. I can't think of a time where somebody's reached out to me on LinkedIn personally asking about mentorship opportunities or asking to pick my brain or asking to do a call. I've never said no. And I can be completely upfront and honest in saying in those times that I've reached out to folks, I've maybe been shot down once or twice in many, requests just to have a chat. Can I buy you a coffee? Can, you happen to be at the same conference as somebody. Hey, do you have 5 minutes? I just want to pick your brain. I just love to shake your hand. And that can very often, again, small success snowballing into a larger success or a larger relationship. That's often how it's worked for me. But you don't necessarily need to be confined to any kind of geographic region or any kind of position. Look, Google your own company, go on LinkedIn, see who's done your job before, reach out to them, say, hey, I see you did this before me. Any words of advice, anyone you can put me in touch with at the company, even if you're not here anymore, would love to hear, what your thoughts are and who I should be talking to better myself.
That's such a great point. And it's true. Like if you reach out to someone and just say, hey, can I buy you a coffee? I'd like to pick your brain for 10 minutes.
$2 of your expense can
Right.
really make or break a career.
Yeah. And to your point, they're not going to say no. And if they do say no, most likely it's probably not someone you want to pick their brain anyway. Or maybe they're just, quite frankly, they're busy. But as long as you're flexible, I think people generally can sense your sense of genuineness, if that makes sense. Right. Absolutely. You can sniff that out versus the person who maybe just like asks for a favor right away. If you lean into general curiosity, people love that and people like to share. Right. So, and I'm glad to hear that, when people reach out to you, that you answer the call on that end. Something you mentioned earlier, which is we hit on it a little bit, but as you think about the future state of gaming, hospitality, entertainment, et cetera, we said 2030, but I'll phrase the question a little differently. So let's play 2034. So we're going out 10 years from now.
Sure.
Yeah. Me and you are sitting down. We're doing this interview. Lauren, good to see you again. Lauren, the thing we underestimated the most 10 years ago, 2024, was what? How do you think you're going to answer that question in 2034?
Oh, it's a good question. So my answer for 2030 is different from what my answer from 2034 would have been, right? So one of the things, if you ask me, what I thought would have happened and didn't by 2030 would have been a bigger proliferation of iGaming, online casino, right? Like we've seen with online sports betting. It hasn't really happened very quickly. It hasn't really grown or snowballed like folks thought it would. The regulation hasn't really kickstarted the way people thought. But I think on the flip side, if you want to talk 2034, I think we'll see a lot more states with active legal iGaming than we do today. It might not happen in the next 5 years, but I think when you're talking about the next 10 years, we'll be talking a lot more about iGaming and iCasino.
Okay. And, Lauren, I want to thank you for taking the time today. I got a couple of final questions here. Yeah. It'll be fun. Hopefully we do get to do that interview in 2034.
Yeah.
We'll replay this.
Oh gosh, please no.
Hopefully I'm a little bit better doing podcasts in 2034, or maybe not. I don't know what that looks like.
Hopefully we're both a little bit better at it. Always room for improvement. You always have to look to better yourself, right?
Yeah, it takes reps. That's what I always tell people.
There you go.
So I guess when you're not in the work mode, whatever that looks like for you, what does that look like? Where do you find inspiration outside of your day-to-day responsibilities, so to speak?
I mean, inspiration, I don't know. I can kind of tell you what I like to do, what I'm into. I can kind of tell you what like what I enjoy.
Yeah, what's your passionate about outside of your career?
Outside of casinos?
Yep.
I don't know. Most of my friends would tell you the thing that I'm most passionate about actually is casinos, but I would say it's travel. I love to travel. I love to cook. I love music. I love fast cars. I love the outdoors. So I think I'm probably at my happiest when I'm either on skis or when I'm on my surfboard or when I'm on horseback or on the golf course, but only if I'm playing well on the golf course. If not, then I'm definitely not enjoying myself.
So do you have a good golf game then?
It's pretty good off the tee, but then it falls apart in the fairways. So
yeah,
it's never always firing on all cylinders as much as I'd like it to.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's like very rarely in golf does it all go your way? So that's got to be a challenge for you.
It never all goes my way. So that's why I say we're kind of 50-50 there on how many days I actually enjoy on the golf course.
And you said fast cars. So
I do.
are you into F1 at all?
I enjoy watching it. I enjoy observing it. I enjoyed watching the entire lead up process and experience in Vegas. I didn't get to go personally, but yes, I do enjoy watching that. And I enjoy driving as well. So
Okay.
I enjoy tracking, driving, all of those things.
Advice to your younger self. So knowing what you know now, if you're going to go back to, when you first started your career, what words of advice would you give to yourself?
Yeah, I think the first one we kind of touched on earlier, right? Seek out and leverage great mentors. That's definitely my number one, because like we said earlier, they can make or break a career. And I think number two, kind of having, mentioned I've always been a little bit type A and pretty driven, is maybe just to chill a little bit, right? So I think a little bit more chill in my younger years probably would have added a few years to my older years.
And on that note, just to chill, how do you approach when somebody says work-life balance? What's your philosophy or approach to that?
Oh, I'll be honest. I think that's something I could probably do a little bit of a better job at. When I'm in the thick of a project or a task, I find it very challenging to step aside and just to walk away and to turn it off. Right? It's one thing that you do kind of sometimes miss about the very early parts of my Wall Street days, back when I was just trading. Right? Your day starts when the market opens and ends when the market closes. And once you move past that, all of a sudden you're dealing in an environment where it's 24/7, right? The gaming industry is 24/7. Connectivity is 24/7. You've got global gaming markets. You're dealing with people all over the world. So it's really hard to just turn off, especially when part of that type of A personality means that I place a very high value on responsiveness, right? I don't just kick an email to the next day, or kick a conversation or a text message or a call to the next day. I want to be on it. So, I think the key to that for me is when I do pencil a vacation or I do pencil some downtime, I make an effort to myself to dedicate myself to it, right? Dedicate myself as much to the vacation as I do to the hard work that I put in. I'll set aside a couple of minutes a day, check those emails, check those messages, because if not, you'll develop a little bit of anxiety about what you're missing. So, even if you just take a few minutes to get through what needs to be done and push it aside, then you can unwind a little bit better. But, I make it a point to always make and find time for my friends and family. I think that is absolutely critical, right? I always make time to respond to them. I always make time to engage with them. Nobody in the world is too busy to even just say, okay, you know what? I'm in the middle of something. I'm acknowledging your message. I'm going to be back to you. And then when you can step back, make sure you invest the time and the energy into it, because it's so easy to get caught up in a career and get caught up in the work and neglect your real team, right? So maybe your team is your work team, but ultimately your team are those people that are there after work, on the side of work, if there is no work, the friends, the family, the loved ones. So you have to make sure to always put in the time for those people and always find a way to be responsive and be on top of those relationships. You've got to make the time, is what it really comes down to. So look, I'll be honest, sometimes making that time and investing in those friends and family and those relationships are at the expense of my own personal sanity and my own personal time and myself. But at the end of the day, my loved ones, my friends, my family take precedence over self. So that's how I create that balance and focusing on them.
100%. And you said, type A personality, kind of like you're very driven, like you get tunnel vision, I imagine, like with the complete stuff.
Yep.
But so do you actually schedule time to like make sure that you do call a friend or your family, or do you actually schedule that time in?
I don't schedule it like, okay, 10 to 11 on Tuesday, I'm going to do this, right? But what I actually try to do is make sure at least once a day I'm proactively checking in with or reaching out to somebody that's not in my mom, my sister, and I. We have a chat that's constantly going. That's just a stream of consciousness. But reach out to a friend you haven't talked to in a little while. Reach out to a high school friend. Reach out to a college friend. Reach out to a colleague that might have been having a tough time with something. Right? Keep those interactions alive and well, and make a point of doing it at least once a day. And look, you can, if you can, you do it more. You always want to have that personal interaction and be there for people when you can be. But I wouldn't say I necessarily put an exact time on it. It's more a quantitative thing.
Yeah, for sure. And then last question on this bit. I'm curious to know, because you mentioned sometimes it's at the detriment or sacrifice of yourself. So is there any morning or evening routine that you have that you do for yourself that's been beneficial that you would recommend to others?
A couple of things, I think. Look, one is a runner, right? My only real time for me where I can, the way I liken it is, I don't, maybe I'm dating myself a little bit here, but there used to be on the old Windows, early computers, a function where you see the papers going into the file folder, like compressing the folders down, right? Filing them away. When I run, that's what I'm doing, right? It takes everything that's going in my brain and my mind, and it allows me to put it in the right folder, to process it, and to compress everything to make sure it's all been dealt with. So for me, running is very important. And I do it outside. The treadmill isn't as effective for me, but just to be outside in the fresh air and using that time to compartmentalize and sort everything that's in my brain but needs to be put into its place. So I think that's clutch. One thing that I've learned, and maybe it's because it's as I've gotten older, but shutting down my phone an hour before I want to go to bed, which is hard, right? Because you're still going, there's still work to be done, there are still people that want to communicate. But if you really want to get any sleep at this point, to take away that level of, the light, the stimulation, the contact, the emails, I think has been very helpful for me. And then the other thing that, I personally do, and I know I guess I'm sure everybody's seen the Instagram video that I always found very impactful. There's a general that I believe is giving a speech to a graduating college class on the merits of making your bed. Get up. I always make my bed. And I think, if I can't control any of the other chaos in my life, at least I know after the end of the day of that chaos, I'm getting back into a nice, tight, comfortable, crisp made bed. So I think those are some things that might seem silly, but make a difference for me.
Yeah, I love that last one. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm a hypocrite a little bit. It's not like I always make my bed, but I try to, and I need to do better. And I do find that it's so true, right? Because it's that first task of the day. And most of
Right.
the time your brain's telling you, just leave it. But
Give it a few more minutes. Okay, something else can go. Yeah.
exactly. But if you could get those early reps, those early wins, kind of going full circle here, but like those early resistance kind of blockers of, no, we're making our bed, this discipline, this is happening. Right?
Exactly.
Like you never regret it. You always come home, to your point, to that made bed, and that little task sets you up for your day. And I think it's a powerful video. For those listening, if you haven't seen it, Google it. It's a really powerful 2-minute video. I think there's a whole book on it, but it's very inspiring. So I love that you added that one as well. Yeah, great 3 tips there. Is there a favorite quote that you have, or maybe not a favorite? Is there one that comes to mind when I say that to you?
I guess that kind of depends, right? So one of the things I mentioned earlier and things I'm passionate about, I love music. So most of the quotes that resonate to me are usually song lyrics. So I think I'll probably take this twofold, right? So if you're talking about a lyrical quote, I'm not going to give you my number one because that's only ever been disclosed to one person, and we're going to keep that under wraps for now. But number 2, I'd probably say it's Bruce. It's you can't start a fire worrying about your little world falling apart. I think to me that embodies needing to take risks to get yourself whatever you're focused on at that point to the next level. You've got to put yourself out there. Sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone, and sometimes it's going to suck, but you just got to put yourself out there and do it. So that one always kind of really resonated with me. And then from a literary perspective, I think it's got to be Randy Pausch. So The Last Lecture, I don't know if that's something you're familiar with, but one of the things that he alludes to in the book, it says, we can't change the cards that were dealt, only how we play the hand. So again, adaptability, going to a willingness and an ability to embrace change and to work with change, I think is absolutely very important to me. So I think those would be the 2 I would go with, leaving the first one out of there.
Yeah, totally respect that. And those are 2 amazing ones. So I love it. Final 2 questions here for you.
Sure.
This one's always interesting, I find. Is there a skill that you admire in others that maybe you don't have, or maybe that you're working on, but like as you evaluate others and maybe other people you've seen have success, whatever that looks like, is there a skill that like they have that you're trying to master, or maybe you won't master, but just a skill that is in other people that you see that maybe that you don't possess?
Yeah, look, I think there are probably two things I'd call out here. The first one is patience, right? When you have that type A driven personality, I do have some. I'm not going to pretend I have zero, but I could always use more. I could always use a little bit more patience, and but I think that anybody could really say that, right? Most people in the world, I think at this point, could use a little more patience, whether you're sitting in traffic or whatever it is you might be doing. I think we could all use a little bit more in our lives. And I think the second one is kind of based off a book that I won't call it the title here, so you don't have to go back and edit any of the video. But there is a book based on this entire concept, and it's learning not to give as much of myself in certain situations. And I know that sounds counterintuitive to somebody that's very focused and driven, but I fully invest myself in the things and the people that I care about, and that includes my work. But I often find that energy isn't always fully returned, right? You're giving every little ounce of what you've got. I'd love to have the skill, which I don't, in being able to walk away or at least learn when I need to step back in those situations. And when I see those situations starting to unfold, when I see that starting to happen, just pull back a little bit. And instead of defaulting to the give more, right? I always want to fix things by giving more. And that just leads to burnout. That leads to burnout in career. It leads to burnout in personal relationships. It leads to burnout in life. So I could definitely be better at learning when to pull back a little bit of myself and what I'm willing to offer to make sure that it's kind of simpatico with what's happening in the situation.
That book, I'm curious to know what it is. Is it the art of
The subtle art of
not giving a blank?
Yeah, that's the book.
Yeah, I have not read that book. I think my wife has it currently, but I've heard multiple people mention it, so I feel like I've got to read it.
It's a worthwhile read for sure.
All right, Lauren, thank you for the time. I'm going to get you out of here on the last question we ask everybody, which is, from your journey, from your standpoint, if someone's like, hey, Lauren, how do I take my career to the next level? For you, what are the 3 tips you would provide on that angle?
I think the first one is to always, and I can't stress this enough, always maintain your integrity and your humility. Strength of character will get you farther in this world than any skill set that you might have. That's not to say you sacrifice confidence, right? Confidence is absolutely important, but there's something to be said for that person or that personality that can always be trusted, who never forgets where they started or the people that helped them along the way, right? I think always strive to be that person. I think the second thing I'd mention is never rest on your laurels. Never stop striving to be better, to improving yourself, to improving your skills, to being the best version of yourself that you can. And then third, I think is a theme that's come up a couple of times: embrace change. Nothing in this world is ever constant. No one necessarily likes change, but those who can embrace change and really thrive in uncertainty or in a changing environment, those are the folks that are going to end up on top.
Lauren Seiler, thank you. Those are 3 awesome tips. I know you're a very busy individual with a lot of responsibilities. So thanks for just taking, 50 minutes and sharing this. I know this is super valuable. I know our audience will find this super valuable, but just to end, thank you.
Truly my pleasure, Kyle. Thank you so much for having me. Hopefully we'll do it again in 2034.
Absolutely. Have a good one, Lauren.
You too.
Check out more episodes at thenextlevelcareers.com.